Join me every month for the inspiration to find your finish line. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Find Your Finish Line, presented by Curad Performance Series, the official medical supplier of Ironman. I'm Mike Reilly, and as you know, in the past, this podcast and now is about you finding your finish line not only at a race or an event, but in life. You've got to find that one first before we can get to the other ones, it seems. As you've been tuning in over the last month or so, you've kind of seen what the gist is of this podcast. It's a little different today. We're going to have a guest on, and I'm going to give him props right away because the idea of doing this was his, to go and kind of go over a previous podcast that we've had. Our guest is none other than Mark Allen, six-time Ironman world champion, renowned global Ironman and triathlon coach, and all-around good guy. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Hey, Mike. Great to see you. So great to be on the podcast.
Well, thank you very much for this and joining us and having the time to do it. I appreciate it, and we all do. So what the idea Mark had is, and I'll let him go into it in some detail, is after listening to Lionel Sanders' podcast a few weeks ago, I even said, Lionel threw out some gems. He threw out some issues about how he trains, about his past, but they were snippets of things that I think we can do better in life and in racing. And Mark kind of got the same thing out of it, didn't you?
Yeah, I was listening to the podcast, and normally I listen to a podcast and it's like, oh, that was great. But this one I have to go back and mark those magical quotes that Lionel had that really apply to life, to finding your journey in a way that often is not easy. How do you pivot in the middle of something when either it's working or not working? And there was just an honesty and an openness and a depth to what he talked about that I thought this would be so great to get back on Find Your Finish Line and highlight it for other athletes out there, because they're all on a journey. We're all on a journey to find that finish line, like you said, in races, in life. And there's so much of what Lionel said that I think applies to both of those journeys.
Well, you're a good buddy. I tell you, I love being around you, but I respect you so much for this because you're an athlete of the past that has done some amazing things. And living off your laurels isn't something you do. I think it's very refreshing that someone like yourself picked this up, took a look at it, and go, gosh, look at this guy, and look at the things that he can teach us, because we can never stop learning, that's for sure. So I respect that tremendously, and thank you very much for that. So, Mark, let's do this. We're going to go into the little snippets of Lionel, some of the things, there's like 6 or 7 of them, and you and I are going to go back and forth because I'd really like to hear your take on some of these, because as I've told people before, it's one of the most remarkable interviews I've ever been involved with. I didn't know it was going to happen this way or progress that it did. So why don't we jump into the first one and we'll see where that takes us.
Great.
We had a turnaround, and then we had to go back uphill.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that must have been a surge or something, because then I got back in. I actually started to put a gap into them. But then I started to notice on all these downhills, the speed with which this guy could take the downs was absolutely amazing. And I think maybe a little piece of me with hindsight, because I had been dealing with this for the last year or so, a little bit of tendonitis in my knee. I think a little piece of me was being very cautious. So then I basically said, if you want to win this thing, you can't have any caution whatsoever. So once I got that through my head, and I really lengthened out my stride and just let gravity do the work, then at least I was able to catch or hang on with him. But it truly took me out of my comfort zone, like in every facet of the comfort zone. And I felt like I was sprinting. Fortunately, hearing him, do a post-race analysis after, he was sprinting. So yeah. I don't feel so bad about it. It just panned out the way it panned out. We went through an aid station with, half a mile to go. And I was like, obviously I'm not going to take a drink. Like, what's the point in taking a drink? And he took a drink and a little gap opened up. And it wasn't because I did anything. It was just because he, slowed down ever so slightly to take a drink. And then, I felt that gap open. I didn't do anything. And then when he didn't close the gap, then I was like, well, maybe this is the moment. And so then I put a little pressure on, and the gap opened a little more. And then I truly did lay down the all out. I had nothing left, and I just went as hard as I possibly could. And I rested for like ever so slightly through this roundabout with about, 300 meters to go. And I kind of looked out of the corner of my eye that he was at the beginning of the roundabout. I was at the end. And I was like, he could close this. This guy is so good at running downhill that he could close this. So I had to just keep going as hard as I possibly could. And fortunately, the finish line wasn't too far away, because if it was, I was probably going to collapse before the finish line. But fortunately, we made it to it.
Mark, it's interesting how much, and you've done this before, the mental strategy one has to go through when they're going one-on-one against somebody. What are you pulling out of that little bit right there?
You know, there were two really key things that came out of that just were like light beams for me. One was how he was nervous about his previous injury, something that was holding him back. And I think a lot of times it's hard to get beyond those because we don't want them to happen again. But at the same time, to reach that peak level of finding your finish line, having that ultimate experience, we have to just say, hey, here I go. Let me just see what happens. And once he did that, then the dynamic started to change. And then the second piece is that, a lot of athletes, I think, go into events and they say, okay, this is how I'm going to place or earn that slot or better my time. And more often than not, races don't pan out the way we hope. And so when Lionel went through that aid station and he didn't grab for that last glass of nutrition, which, personally, I was having a flashback then in 1989 when Dave and I went to that aid station, and he grabbed, and I decided not to at the last second, and that was where a gap opened up, and I went on to win the first Ironman. But it just shows that you have to figure out how you're going to have your best race on the day, in the moment, and you don't know which moment is going to be the final key to unlock that amazing ending, finishing moment. Lionel didn't know what it was going to be until that last aid station, and it wasn't really a plan, but all of a sudden he realized, this is it. And it's funny because he said, I was sprinting and I was going as hard as I could go, but then when that moment happened, all of a sudden he goes, I upped the pressure. And so when you realize this is the moment, all of a sudden there's a whole other level that you can go to that you're sort of holding back against because you're just not sure if that's the right moment. He knew it was. That was the chance. And he upped it from actually sprinting already to even a higher level. And then he went on for that win, that victory. Amazing lessons.
Exactly. And in that last portion, he also did something else that I caught from that. He jumped outside of his comfort zone, which is the hardest thing for any of us to do. We love that. Even when you train, and if you go out and train hard and you had a big ride and a big run, you know what it's like. But you got to go beyond that sometimes in a race. So he made that decision. I'm going to have to get out of my comfort zone. Easier said than done, though, isn't it?
Absolutely. And sometimes you think you are already outside of your comfort zone. I mean, for sure, when he and Sam were closing those final kilometers, they both felt like they were at the limit. But then you realize, wait a minute, there is another level that I can go to, and now's the moment to do it. You don't want to waste it. You don't want to go to that very, very extreme of what you're capable of too early, because then you blow up.
Right.
So that's finding how to get there on the day, in the moment of the race.
And as you know from watching the podcast, I went into Lionel's past. And the reason I wanted to do that is because obviously there's a lot of people out there struggling with what Lionel struggled with. Addiction is a very, very tough thing to deal with, and you need help doing that. So let's listen to this little snippet about his addiction and how he saw himself pulling himself out of it, which he did.
Oh, I mean, well, that's a long story. You're going into the depths of my of my mind. I mean, that whole thing started off very innocently. I was just a kid partying, really, and I didn't think anything of it. And I went down that pathway, and at some point, and I don't know when that happened, it switched from just, having fun and partying with your friends to a negative aspect, to a negative thing. Like I was starting to kind of drain my sorrows in a way. I started to feel insecure with myself, and I just went further and further down that pathway into that lifestyle. And really, I was just like medicating. At some point, I was just medicating myself, and the only highs I was getting in life were highs from substances. And I mean, that when you're there, that's not good. Yeah. And I went down that pathway for several years, and that's where I ended up. And fortunately, I had remembered experiences that were positive that didn't come from substances, and it just so happened that running was one of those things that I had fond memories. Something that I was competent. As a youngster, I was competent at running. And I did track meets and cross country, and I had, small success, and, made me feel good about myself. And so I think that's why when I was kind of, down in the dumps and having no direction, I think that's why the natural thing that popped into my head was to go for a run. And I did that on November 5th, 2009. And I went, and it was night, I was like severely social phobic and didn't go outside during the day. And I went for a run at like midnight through a graveyard. And it was just, it was like a transformative experience. And, things don't happen overnight, of course. I still was living in these environments. I still had a lot of negative influences around me, but that was definitely the beginning of the change. And basically a month went by, and I ran, pretty well every single day for a month. I don't know why, but I logged all this stuff strangely. And I still have that old log. Wow. And I was running like 5 kilometers a day for approximately a month. And I still, I was definitely getting better, but I still felt like I needed more. And then that's how Ironman came into my life. And I had this weird idea to do an Ironman, just popped into my head, and Googled what it was. And then, fortunately, my mom gave me the credit card. I told her I have this crazy idea. I want to devote myself to doing an Ironman triathlon. And she said, "Do you really think you can do something like that?" And I was like, "I know it doesn't seem that way right now that I could do that, but I think if I devote myself to it, I will be able to do it. And I think it's going to take me where I want my life to go."
The refreshing part for me, Mark, on that was his openness and honesty. And I'm glad it came out, because I think it's going to help a lot of people. But isn't it, and I've seen a lot of stories, and so have you, isn't it just remarkable how when the decision is made, and this is not the cure-all, but the decision is made to take that negative and move it into a physical positive, like going for a little jog or going for a run. Obviously, Ironman was at the end of his road, and it has been a lot of people. But what do you think that is that Lionel said, that why it clicked for him to just go out for that run and try to go into a positive direction?
Well, exactly that. He had that memory of running when he was younger. It gave him a positive feeling, and he knew that where he was at was not working. And it can be so hard to get out of those addictive cycles, whether it's drugs or relationships or just maybe a negative way you perceive yourself. And so it's like, okay, maybe if I move my body, which is such a simple but powerful action that any human being can take, that'll help me to feel a little bit better. When I'm out there walking or running or swimming or cycling or just moving my body, I feel a little bit better. And it gives me a break from all the stuff that's dragging me down. And it was really interesting, because he recognized right away, even after that first month, that it wasn't cured. It's going to take some time. But he knew that those positive feelings each and every day of exercising, of eventually having that great goal to do an Ironman, something that, like, his mom's like, "Can you really think you can do that?" And like he said, "I don't know, but it's going to take me in a direction that I want to go in." And so hopefully we can all use sport for something positive, and have it be something that each and every day it gives us a great feeling about our life. We're doing something positive for our health. It's helping reduce stress. We all saw that during COVID, that just getting out and moving is a really amazing thing that we can do. And now back to racing. If we can keep that innocence, which I think Lionel had in the beginning, he had that innocence of, I don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to try anyway.
Yeah, it's I've heard so many stories, and one that just popped into my head. It was a few years ago, and a young woman called me up, and I was talking to her, and she said she got back into running, but the first few months that she did it, she would carry her alcohol flask with her. It was her crutch. And she'd take a drink of that and a drink of water, like 50-50, and she didn't feel so bad. And finally, one run, she didn't carry that flask anymore and started going to AA. And she's done an Ironman. It's transformative in a way that I don't think they realize when it happens, but they do realize that the very first step they take, like something different's happening in my mind and my body. So our biggest advice, and we're not doctors or psychologists, but that first step is the hardest one to take. But once you do, it takes you to a lot of great places.
Absolutely.
So I asked Lionel, what drives him? You know what those drivers are inside of you. You know what drivers are inside of some of the athletes you coach. We know some of the drivers of other professional athletes, male and female. So when I asked Lionel what that driver was, it was pretty interesting what he talked about.
I mean, that has changed over the years. In the beginning, in November 5th, 2009, what woke me up was, I want to get out of this place as fast as I can. I want to go in the opposite direction of where I am right now as fast as I can. And that was my driver for a long time, actually. I would say probably 3 years. And there's books written on it, like, positive addiction. I basically replaced a negative addiction with a positive addiction. But over time, I started to realize, I don't necessarily want to be addicted to this thing, because what happens if I lose this? What happens if I'm unable to do this? Am I going to go back to that negative addiction? And so then I started to have to, do introspection and find out, how do I do this in such a way that if I am unable to do this anymore, that I won't go back, and I've made good, mental changes and physical changes in my life that will keep me on a good path forever.
Yeah, the things that prompt someone to change their ways and drive them. Lionel had many of them, and people have many of them just like Lionel, don't they, Mark?
Yeah, and I think one of the keys in that for me was that sport or peak performance can kind of become like an addiction, or it can be a negative in that if you don't quite get there, it drives you crazy. And we've probably seen a lot of athletes, me included, on the bad days, just like, and you want to get back and you want to go harder, and then you're exhausted, and then finally you reach a point where you've done it so wrong that you go, okay, wait a minute, let me get back to basics here. Let me just get back into the enjoyment, the fulfillment, and just see where it takes me. But I really like that honesty and that awareness that he had, that he knew that this could just be a replacement addiction for drugs. And he's like, no, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to continue to perfect myself as an athlete, but also to change those patterns within myself that allow me, that would weaken and enable me would force me back to being an addict again if maybe I'm injured and I can't do this, or I lose my sponsors, or whatever it is. And so it was a real message, I think, for everyone to, in a very nutshell word, keep things balanced with their sports and their goals and their dreams.
Yeah, it becomes an issue where you don't want to relapse in any way, shape, or form. And I talk to a lot of people with addictive behaviors, and that is a huge fear. Even if they've been sober for 9 years or whatever, there's that thing in the back of their mind, I don't want to go back to that world, but I hope I don't. I have to keep doing the things and the routines and the working out and the therapy to stay away from that. And Lionel realized that, and a lot of people do, and because relapse is probably a very scary thing. People going back into a world that they don't want to go into.
Especially after you've built momentum. You've had a certain period where you are free of your addiction, and then in a weak moment, maybe you get sucked back into it. You don't want that to happen, because then it is even harder that second time and the third time to try and rebuild the momentum in the positive direction. But he latched onto the sport, but then again, at the same time, continued to work on himself. And that's, a great message for all of us. We are all transformed through this sport. At the same time, when we go home and we put our race gear away, we still have to do laundry and put the dishes in the dishwasher and go to work and go to the store and do all those things. And so sport is part of transforming us, but we also have to do that sort of personal work to keep evolving as people, to create that great vision for our lives. Like you said, finding the finish line in all aspects.
Hold on, everyone. We'll be right back after a message from our sponsors. Even after 40 years on the microphone at thousands of events, welcoming hundreds of thousands of athletes to the finish lines, I am still in awe by the incredible endurance of each and every athlete and what you display. The physical exertion, the sweat, and the challenges you put your body through deserve a level of support that match your dedication. As the official medical supplier for the IRONMAN US Series, Curad Performance Series lineups of wraps, tapes, bandages, supports, and braces give you, the serious athlete and weekend warriors alike, the optimal support needed to keep moving, including new far infrared kinesiology tape technology, which reduces energy made through body heat, back to targeted areas to help you heal faster and enhance performance. So don't you let sprains and muscle pain hold you back. Recover smarter and shop the entire Curad Performance Series on Amazon. Lionel, talking about purpose, and throughout your career and being able to see you, from the 80s on and watch you perform and the type of work ethic that you had. But purposes always, sometimes, well, not always, they change a lot of times, but you've got to have a purpose that is big and bold in your life, don't you?
Absolutely. It's the big things that sort of scare you a little bit, like, geez, I don't know if I can do that, or I don't know if I can hang on long enough to do that. Those are the ones that really take you to a whole new level within yourself. And when you do get to that point of you make it to the finish line, you achieve a goal that you're after like that, there's such a deep personal satisfaction and empowerment that comes from it. The easy goals, they're easy to hit, they're not as fulfilling, and a lot of times we give up on them because it's like, oh, well, I could have done that.
Yeah.
But, when you go for the big ones, those are the ones that really draw you forward in your life.
Well, let's listen to Lionel's bit on his purpose.
That's probably actually what created the next series of motivators. And, for me, it happened actually, interestingly, in St. George in 2014. It was my third pro race. It was also the North American Championship. You had Jan Frodeno, Brent McMahon, Tim Don. You had all the best guys then, all in their prime, too. And I went to it thinking, I'm going to contend with these guys. And that couldn't have been any further from the truth. I got 18th place, 10 minutes off the pace. I got beaten in all three disciplines. It seemed like there was no way that I could ever contend with these guys. And I had that experience. It called into question, what am I doing this for? Because I felt like a complete bag of garbage, to be honest with you, after the race. And I went for a run out in the beautiful Red Rocks in St. George with my mom. And I basically said, has triathlon really become this for you? Like, you feel bad about yourself right now. Like, it's actually become negative in a sense. And I said, you need to fix this right here and right now. And so literally out there running with my mom, I came to this conclusion and I fixed it right then and there. And I said, from now on, you only do this to do your best. And on the day, the only thing I ever want from you ever again, no expectations whatsoever other than to give me your best on the day. And I don't care it has nothing to do with your place. It has to do with, even if you screw your nutrition up, get a flat tire, go down the list, I still want you to do your best and finish to the best of your ability with the cards that you're dealt on the day. But that, I'd say, is what is motivating me now, is to just do my absolute best. Not in like a corny sense or something, just like truly give this sport, if you're going to do it, devote yourself to it and do your absolute best and see where you can go. And if I can win Kona, then great. And if I can't win Kona, but you did your very best, then I'm fine with that too. No problem.
He went out for a run with his mom, Mark, and he found his purpose. It was like a light went off, and that happens to a lot of people. But when he found that purpose, he was able now to say to himself, if I don't get first, but I gave it 100%, that's hard to do, isn't it?
It's hard to do, but what he did was so empowering. You know, it's easy to have your purpose be to beat somebody or hit a particular time or complete a certain race. It's much harder, but much deeper if your purpose is to actually really give the best that you have. And what I love about Lionel's comment on that is that he thought he was going to contend with those guys, and he got 18th, and he was like, what am I doing? You know, most guys would try to cover up that vulnerability, that they didn't have what their vision was. And they'd say, oh, well, I had a bad, my brakes were rubbing, and, I lost my nutrition, and it was, this guy stumbled in front of me and I had to slow down. He didn't make one excuse. He knew that it wasn't about anything that happened in the race. Going forward was about redirecting his mindset, his focus, his purpose. And yes, that is the hardest thing to go into something saying, look, this is about me giving the absolute best that I have. And I've heard him talk about no limits. And somebody sort of called him on the carpet on that recently, and they were saying, well, you have limits. You didn't win this race, or you fell apart in that one. And he said, no limits is having every cell in my body screaming to quit, but I keep going. And that was hitting that purpose of giving the best that he had with the cards that are dealt on the day.
And I referring to Ironman Coeur d'Alene, which Lionel had a very difficult day and had gastrital problems, and he was throwing up out there. But he finished, and this, he didn't know that the podcast was before the Ironman Coeur d'Alene. But when he said, whatever happens or cards I'm dealt with on the day, if I do my very best, I'm happy with myself. And that's why Lionel walked to that finish line in Coeur d'Alene and finished an hour after the winners did. Not because he wanted to finish because he wanted to be recognized by people, because he felt good about himself, giving all he had on a day that gave him a lot of crap.
And he might look back on that and go, in certain aspects, that was one of the greatest races I've ever had, because it was so difficult to keep going, and I found the strength to do it. And finding that strength, that inner thing that you didn't know you had to make it through those really, really difficult moments or races in completion, those are the ones you often look back and go, wow, I'm really proud of what I did out there.
Yeah, it was something else bringing him across. Second place syndrome, Mark. You felt it. Age group athletes have felt it. Qualifying for Kona, and they miss a spot by one spot, It is rampant out there, and Lionel discusses that too. Let's listen to this.
And yeah, it was all so clear, but I mean, this is the human aspect of it. It was like, I like to call it like second place syndrome, because it was like, instead of just like, you got beat by like 0.5%, over the course of 8 hours, you got beat by 0.5%. So instead of just finding, a couple of 0.25% here and there, just making little tweaks and coming back and doing it again, instead I was like, okay, we're going to change everything. David Tilbury Davis, no, you're gone. Sorry, I can do this myself, guy. I went and raced Jan in Oceanside in 2018 and didn't have a great performance. And then I was like, okay, we got to change everything about the bike. Even though I'd had the fastest bike split in like most of the race that I had done over the last 4 years leading into that, let's change everything. Frame size, tires, wheels, pedals, power meter, every single thing. Let's change all that. Go down the list. These are the things. This is the second place syndrome at its finest.
Second place syndrome at its finest. It's almost like, I'm a champion at my finest, but the second place syndrome, it's like you talk yourself into second place syndrome, don't you?
Yeah, and the funny thing about it, it's not funny, but like you said, I just needed a few little 0.25% here and there, and I crossed the line in Kona in first place. And I think one of the traps that a lot of athletes get sucked into is they finish a race and something didn't go the way they hoped. They're just this short of that big goal, and it's emotional. You're either maybe you're devastated, you're disappointed, you're frustrated, you're pissed, and so that's when you get into that second place syndrome, and you think, okay, everything has to change. Let me read the next month's edition of the triathlon magazine or whatever it is, and I'm going to get a whole new training program, a different coach. I'm going to eat keto instead of paleo, and whatever it is. I always tell people, wait until the emotion of that finish dissipates. Give yourself 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever it is, and then assess. Because the solutions you'll find once you let the emotion die and you're less disappointed and connected to that finish, then you'll have clarity to go, oh, I was so close. And really the only thing I need to change is this one small aspect about my nutrition or the position on my bike or whatever. You don't need to do a complete overhaul. And so, that was a great lesson that Lionel said indirectly there. It's like, give yourself distance so that you can view what happened clearly, and then ask yourself, what will take me from second to first, from being this shy of my goal to achieving that great dream?
Mark, I gotta go down the road here, because you in my mind lived in second place syndrome for 6 or 7 years battling in Kona. And I saw you frustrated. I saw you screaming at your bike. I saw you, weeks afterwards where you were kind of sour. No, you were just a pain in the ass. You were sour. So you lived there. Did a win have to pull you out of it, or did you pull yourself out of it in other ways?
If I had waited for the win to pull me out of it, I would have never won. And that's the catch-22 or the performance paradox. As long as I knew that I was going to be disappointed from that second place or that third place or being in the lead and falling apart, I was never going to be clear enough to actually put the last few pieces in place that would allow me to be the champion. And so after my 6th attempt at winning and my 6th failure, I will admit, I was not a fun guy to be around for a while. And it took me a while to get enough distance. It actually took from October until January before I was finally like, all right, am I even going to go back there? No, I'm not going to go back. And then I go, wait a minute, I have to go back. And I realized I have put probably 95, 98% of the pieces together that will enable me to have that race that I envision. But it has to be about having my best race, just like Lionel said. And so in 1989, that really was my main focus, because I thought, as Lionel said, I can give my best and somebody else can still win. But if I give my best, then I can walk away and say, that was great. And I knew I hadn't had my best. And so all of my training that year was around figuring out, how do I get just a little bit faster swimming, a little bit faster cycling, a little bit faster running, get my mindset in a more stable place so that if all chaos is happening and somebody's like way stronger than me, it won't freak me out. And I can just have that best race. And so it was just small changes that ended up unlocking that incredible performance, that incredible race against Dave Scott.
Yeah, it was, I'll never forget it, buddy. That's for sure. Lionel says, and I've heard you say it before, I've heard other champions say it before, it's not that complicated at the end of the day. Do the basics. And he had a great message here. Let's listen to this about how his limits were created in the mind.
And then I just started to realize, like, this is not that complicated. We can overcomplicate this if we want. Just do the basics really, really well. Obviously, you need to have good equipment, good aerodynamics. But the guys who are winning, the guys who are consistently the best, Jan Frodeno, for instance, Sebastian Kienle, another very consistent performer, they just do the basics really, really well. They train really well, really consistently. And they show up on race day in good shape, not overtrained or anything, just in good shape, firing on all cylinders, hungry, and then they execute on race day.
Well, maybe on the bottom of that tat right there, we could put master the basics.
I need that one up my forearm just so every day I'm looking at it.
Okay. I've been doing 3,000. Okay, no, slow down on the watts.
I would put, if I were to get one on my forearm, I think I would get which I wouldn't, but if I was going to get one on my forearm, I'd get limits are created in the mind. That's what I would put.
How? He should put limits are created in the mind tattoo. That's a great tattoo for everybody. But those limits are created upstairs, aren't they?
They are. I mean, of course, there are limits in a sense. But like I said, his concept of limits is, how do I take myself to a level that maybe I didn't think I could go to? Maybe I'm not fast enough to be the winner of the Ironman, but how do I get a little bit more out of my performance? And it was really interesting, just that concept of do the basics well. I coach a lot of people, and I have for many years, and some of them understand that. They just plug away. They train smart. They don't overtrain. They don't do too much fast stuff. They know that transformation in their performance is not going to take place in a month. It's going to take over a number of years. And other folks, they do the basics for a couple of weeks, and then they want a secret, a big secret that they can put, and it'll take them from here to here. That doesn't happen. Those basics are what create amazing things. Like they say, little by little adds up to a lot. But those limits are definitely created in our mind. So many times we have an image of ourselves, of what we're capable of, and I love to just maybe push a little bit beyond that on a daily basis, not in a crazy way, but just in a way that keeps me excited about what I'm doing in sport and sparks me to keep perfecting myself and improving what I'm bringing into my sport or in my life as I go toward the ultimate finish line.
I mean, did you ever think when we were Lionel's age or somebody younger, even a Sam Long or anybody else racing, that we would end up one day listening to them and pulling nuggets out of it, like, wow, he or she reminded me of something I knew in the past, but I've been ignoring it, or he gave me something that I didn't even realize. That seemed to have happened to you, and it certainly happened to me and with Lionel's interview.
Yeah, I said, he had so many nuggets and so many amazing human stories and transformations about his journey. And I thought, we have to talk about this and discuss it. Probably a lot of people are going through similar journeys, but they're either unwilling to talk about it, or maybe they can't even put it into words. And Lionel is so great at taking the human experience and his journey and not sugarcoating it. Like some pros, they'll go, oh, gee, I had a bad day training today because my brakes were rubbing and the bolt on my handlebars broke and I had to get an Uber home. Lionel, he'll go, I had a bad day because my body was tired as hell. He's honest. It's like he's taking responsibility for his experience, and he's transforming that on a daily basis with his mindset, with his limits or no limits, with how he trains, covering the basics. So many lessons for all of us.
It becomes, I start thinking about the working man's world, the working person's world, I should say, and of getting up every morning, going in, doing your job, doing your work, coming home. And that's how Lionel approaches it. That's how Paula approached. That's how Heather approached it. That's how Natasha and Chrissy approached it. That's how you and Dave approached it. And it seems that at the end of the day, what happens is the people that approach it in a working person's mindset, they end up being a little more balanced than others, don't they?
Well, hopefully. That's really one of the keys, is to keep it all balanced, to give everything you have to it, but at the same time, taking time to relax, to spend time with your family and friends, to not have sport become an addiction, an obsession, but have it be an exploration.
Yeah, a great lifestyle exploration. I love that. At the end of every one of my podcasts, if you've been watching them, I have a little tidbit at the end called Tri-Table Racing. And I got this idea from great friends of mine who raced the Baja 1000 race and in their trophy trucks. And afterwards, they call it table racing. They all sit around the table in the desert or at the campsite and reminisce about the race, what happened at that race or what happened at a previous race. So I'm going to put you on the spot on Tri-Table Racing. Bring up a memory of an event, good or bad, whatever you want, that we're sitting around the table having a beer and we're talking about it and you bring it up. What would that be?
Oh, geez. One of the greatest memories I have from the sport was something that happened outside of an event. It was the half Ironman distance race they had in Pucón, Chile. And it's in this beautiful lake where the sand is actually crushed lava from the Villarrica volcano, which is just standing prominent over the region, and it's snow covered as glaciers, and it's an active volcano. So at night you can see this orange glow coming from the cauldron at the very top. And so the day after the race, the first year I did it, we did an expedition. It's a tour that anybody can do, and it's about 8 hours up and down, walking up this volcano with crampons and ice axe and everything, and then getting to the top, and as you get close you can smell this sulfur from the stuff that's coming up from the cauldron, and then you get to look into it, and you look down, and there's this massive, like, giant washing machine of bubbling red lava, and it's like you're looking into the birth and creation of Earth itself. And it was just so breathtaking and amazing. And I would have never had that experience had I not gone to Chile and done that half Ironman distance race down there.
I love that. I'd never heard you tell that story before. I vaguely remember you guys doing a hike after that race. There were some other pros with you, right?
Yeah, all the pros were down there. We did it. They put us all in this tour together, and there's a tour guide who takes you up and brings you back down, and hopefully brings you back down. Most of us made it.
That's very cool. I love it. Well, I have, thank you so much, Mark, for bringing this up. He sent me an email and said, hey, we've got to talk about this Lionel podcast because there's so many great things that all of us can get out of it. And I know I did, and I know you did too. So thank you very much for having this idea and being on Find Your Finish Line. And we got to do this again. There's so many performances out there happening now. It's like extraordinary. Like, oh my gosh, did I just see that? It seems our sport is kind of going to that level right now. So I'm sure we're going to have stuff we can talk about in the future.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Huge hats off to Lionel for all he's done in the sport, for the sport, and how amazing of a human being he is.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for your time. And well, everybody, again, another edition of Find Your Finish Line presented by Curad Performance Series, the official medical supplier of Ironman. If you enjoyed the show, then please subscribe if you would, and leave a review of the show so we can see how we're doing and what we can do better. You can leave that review on my website, mikereilly.net/podcast, or you can leave that review with your favorite podcast platform. Remember, there are things in life and racing that we don't have control over, but you do have control over your attitude. So keep that positive and that will get you to the finish line. So find your finish line, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. And as always, my warmest aloha.